Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio. So today, I'm going to be showing you a very fun new rogue deck, which has just popped up into the consciousness of the Pokemon trading card game community. It is Wobbuffet, Quad Wobbuffet, or as I like to call it, Wobbuffet. Now, it is all based around Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet came out a little while ago in Phantom Forces. It is, however, still legal in the format due to the reprint in Generations. And Wobbuffet here, it's all about the ability Bide Barricade. As long as Wobbuffet's in the active, no Pokemon have any abilities other than psychic Pokemon. Now this is very, very important because it means you can still use Tapu Lele. Anybody can still use Tapu Lele. That's a very big one. But it means Volcanian's not going to be using any Steam Up abilities. It means that Shaman is not going to be used to draw extra cards. It means the Vikavolt is not going to be strong charging anytime soon. And the way you play this deck is with 4 Wobbuffet and absolutely no other Pokemon whatsoever. And the reason is very, very simple. If you play other Pokemon, your opponent can play a Lysander to drag something else into the active, because Wobbuffet only blocks abilities when it's in the active. If you play 4 Wobbuffet, then your opponent can never, ever have any other Pokemon in your active slot. You will always be blocking non-psychic abilities for the entirety of the game. Now this does mean that you need to use something like Bridget here to get more Wobbuffet out, and it means that you will be needing to use Rescue Stretcher to recover some of those Wobbuffet. You want to force your opponent to KO 6 Wobbuffet in order to win the game. Now you're not playing any energy here, no energy whatsoever. You are not going to be attacking this game. You are going to be trying to deck your opponent out. If either player cannot draw a card at the beginning of their turn, then they lose the game, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what Wobbuffet is aiming to do. So one of the things they have to do is get rid of all of your energy to make sure that you can never KO their Wobbuffet. And there are several ways to do this. There's the item card Crushing Hammer. Flip a coin, if heads, discard one of your opponent's energy anywhere on the field. There is Enhanced Hammer, which doesn't need a coin flip, but can only discard special energy. There's Team Flare Grunt, which is a supporter, which can discard any energy but only attach to the active Pokemon. And then we've got Team Skull Grunt. Team Skull Grunt is a very important one here, because what your opponent is going to try and do when you're playing Wobbuffet is hold their energy in their hand for the perfect turn. So you use Team Skull Grunt here to discard 2 energy cards from their hand, so that they can't just hold the energy for the perfect turn. And between these cards, you are trying to make sure that your opponent never has any energy whatsoever on their Pokemon. But this isn't quite enough as well. You need to make sure that you accelerate their decking out. So you play Team Rocket's Trickery. Team Rocket's Trickery allows you to flip 2 coins. For each heads, you get to discard 2 cards from the top of your opponent's deck. If you hit a pair of heads, then that means you get to discard 4 cards from the top of their deck. But of course, double tails means that you've got absolutely nothing. And there are some other disruptive cards that we need to play here as well. Captivating Pokepuff to force your opponent to bench all of their basic Pokemon. Because of course one thing your opponent is going to be trying to do here is not bench any Pokemon with high retreat costs that can be Lysandered into the active, and to make sure that they've just got one Pokemon on which they can build up a bit of energy. So what are you going to do? You're going to play Captivating Pokepuff to force them to bench said Pokemon. And actually, you can play Lysander here as well, so that you can drag something with a high retreat into the active. So one tech that a lot of people tend to play nowadays is Sudowoodo from Guardians Rising. Well, it's got a retreat cost of 2, so if your opponent benches at themselves, or if you can grab it with Captivating Pokepuff, you can then Lysander it into the active, and your opponent is unlikely to be able to retreat it anytime soon. Yay! The other card you really need to play here for disruption is Field Blower. It gets rid of stadiums and it gets rid of tools. The main one we're really looking for here is Floatstone. Floatstone is going to allow your opponent to easily retreat any Pokemon that do end up benched. So you need to be playing Field Blower so that your opponent cannot take advantage of Floatstone. The other thing is, of course, you need to be able to reuse a bunch of these cards. So we're playing 4 Versus Seeker, so we can reuse cards like Team Flare Grunt, Team Skull Grunt, Team Rocket's Trickery, etc. And 4 Puzzle of Time, because if you play 2 Puzzle of Time at once, you get to grab any 2 cards from your discard pile. Maybe you know your opponent's got basics in hand after a Team Skull Grunt, so you can use Puzzle of Time to grab back a Captivating Pokepuff. Maybe they've got some special energy on the field and you want to grab back some Enhanced Hammer to get rid of them. Whatever you want to do, you've got an option. Now, there were a couple of players who did quite well with this deck at the North American International Championships. So the question is the deck any good? I've just described how it works, but is it actually any good? I suspect the answer might in fact be no. One huge disadvantage you've got when playing Quad Wobbuffet is that you're only playing 4 basics. So it is likely that you will mulligan. Mulliganing is where you don't have a basic Pokemon in your hand at the beginning of your turn, so you have to show your hand to the opponent to prove you don't have a basic. Then you draw a new hand and your opponent is able to draw an extra card, kind of like a punishment. Now, the extra card isn't what's interesting here. What's interesting is that you are going to be mulliganing and showing your opponent your hand. They're going to see all the disruption cards, then you're going to start with a Wobbuffet. Ladies and gentlemen, your opponent is often going to know that you are playing Quad Wobbuffet. You're giving them that information. And the reality is there are a bunch of decks that can beat this. Anything that attacks for 1 energy is going to have a nice advantage here, because you can attach an energy and immediately attack. And then your opponent doesn't get to get rid of that energy. Now, something like Garbodor here might count, depends how many item cards a Wobbuffet player plays, but if Wobbuffet plays 3 item cards at any point during the game, you're getting a 1-hit KO with Garbodor, and of course, for a single energy. So you can just wait them out, to be perfectly honest. You can attach a couple energy, and either they're going to discard it, or you're going to be able to do a bit more energy, and eventually you're going to be able to use the bigger attack on Garbodor, which will get an easy KO, that Acid Spray. If they discard the energy, sooner or later they're going to run out of Flare Grunt and have to use Crushing Hammer and Versus Seeker, and as soon as they start using item cards, you should get a quick 1-hit KO. Greninja is an incredibly easy matchup, because Greninja attacks for a single energy and then puts the energy back into your hand. So as soon as you get a single Greninja in play, you can just Moonlight Slash for 80 a turn, and you should be absolutely fine. Unless they manage to discard all of your Greninja or all of your energy, you really shouldn't struggle too much to beat Wobbuffet with Greninja. And of course, all your Greninja have free retreat as well, which is fairly handy. Lurantis GX is quite a good matchup, because again, you get a single Lurantis GX in play, and you only need a single energy to use Flower Supply. Now, it's going to take a while to win doing 40 damage per turn, but your opponent's going to be discarding all of your energy. When you use Flower Supply, you grab it back into your hand, which means that your opponent is just not going to be able to discard all your energy fast enough, and before too long you should be able to use Solar Blade to win the game in a couple of turns. Volcanion is a bad matchup here, because with Volcanion you can use the baby Volcanion, hey Nick, to make sure that you can be attacking for a single energy while attaching energy to the bench, and when you're attaching energy to the bench, your opponent is less likely to be able to Lysander stall. Now, maybe they can grab an EX into the active that you started with, and then you're really struggling, but most of the time you should be able to do something here. And that is the big problem. Any single energy attacker is going to have problems for this. But to be perfectly honest, you just need to know how to play the matchup. I think Wobbuffet won an awful lot of games when it first came out because people didn't know how to play against it. I played against this on my stream, twitch.tv/PTCGRadio, this past weekend with Mega Gardevoir. So my game plan initially was, I get a single Mega Gardevoir, I do not bench any other Pokemon. Sooner or later I'll draw into a Mega Turbo, I play Mega Turbo and an Energy in one turn, and not only do I get to then attack, but I also get to discard all of my bench, so my opponent can't Lysander Stall. Now in the end that never worked, so what I did was I switched into a Tapu Lele that I'd played to use Brock's Grit, more on that in a moment, and then I built up energy on a bench Gardevoir, while my opponent could only get rid of it using Crushing Hammer, because you cannot Flare Grunt basic energy on the bench. And when I had enough energy on Gardevoir, I switched to Gardevoir, and then I started KOing the Wobbuffet while discarding all the bench. And of course I used Tapu Lele to grab Brock's Grit, started recovering all of my cards. Even if I hadn't won by KOing the Wobbuffets, or well, my opponent scooped, but I was going to win by KOing the Wobbuffets, honestly, he was going to deck out before I was, because I was just going to use Brock's Grit over and over again. And here is the key, ladies and gentlemen, when you're playing against Quad Wobbuffet. One attacker, play as few cards as you possibly can. Your opponent's trying to deck you out, so just don't play any cards. Get one attacker set up, and as soon as you get enough energy on one attacker, you're going to win the game. Now, if you've only got an attacker like, for instance, Tapu Bulu, where you just cannot get the energy on fast enough, you are going to lose the game. But there's so many decks like Volcanion and Greninja that really only need one energy to get going. Even something like Mega Gardevoir, where you're thinking, oh, it's a Mega Evolution, oh, it needs 2 energy. I had one attacker, I played few cards, I took my time to build up the energy without it all getting discarded on the bench, although I initially tried to use Mega Turbo, like I said, and I won the game. That's how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think this deck is here to stay, but it's a fun little deck, although it is incredibly frustrating to play against. Now, before we finish this video, I need to inform you that Steve Smith is a lovely, lovely man, although I hear it is not the former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver. He is one of my supporters over at patreon.com/PTCGRadio. He is a lovely man. You need to know this. Now, if you've got anything you want to say about this Wobbuffet deck, chuck it down in the comments. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter @TheWassy, and check my stream at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio for some live action. The most important thing, as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.